I want you to understand what kind of woman my wife is before I tell you what her daughter did to her. Miriam has been cooking Sunday dinners since she was 11 years old. Not because someone made her. Because her mother worked doubles at the hospital on weekends, and Miriam was the oldest, and somebody had to feed the younger ones. She learned to make a roux from her grandmother, learned to roll pie crust from a neighbor down the street, learned almost everything else from trial and error, and a worn-out Better Homes and Gardens cookbook that's still on our shelf with the spine held together by packing tape. She's 71 now, and she still cooks like it means something. Like the food is a letter she's writing to the people she loves. That's who she is, and that's why what happened last Christmas hurt the way it did. Not because it was unexpected exactly, but because it confirmed something we'd been trying not to say out loud for years. Our daughter-in-law's name is Brooke. She married our son, Travis, 6 years ago in a vineyard outside of Charlottesville. It was a beautiful wedding. Miriam made 3 pies for the rehearsal dinner, because Brooke mentioned once in passing that she loved lemon chess pie. Miriam wrote it down. That's the kind of woman she is. Brooke is not the kind of woman who writes things down. I don't want to be unfair to her. She works hard. She's a marketing director at a firm in Richmond, and she travels a fair amount, and I understand that her life is busy. Travis is a civil engineer. They have a house in the Short Pump area, nice neighborhood, good school district. They have 2 kids, 7 and 4, and the 4-year-old is a handful in the best possible way. We drive down from Harrisonburg to see them about once a month, sometimes more. I want to be honest with you. For most of those 6 years, Miriam made excuses for Brooke. The birthday card that came 3 weeks late. She's so busy, she probably just lost track. The Thanksgiving 4 years ago when Brooke spent most of the meal on her phone. She had something work-related, I'm sure. The time Brooke corrected the way Miriam pronounced a restaurant name in front of a table full of people, and laughed it off like it was a joke. Miriam smiled, and I said nothing. And later that night in the car, she stared out the passenger window and didn't speak for 40 minutes. I should have said something then. I know that now. The pattern, if I'm being honest, was that Brooke had learned over 6 years that Miriam would accommodate. That there was no request too large, no assumption too bold, because Miriam would find a way to say yes. Not because she was a pushover, exactly. Because she was a mother who wanted things to be good, wanted her son's marriage to be good, wanted the grandchildren to grow up in a family that felt whole and warm. She was paying a price for that, and I was watching it happen, and I kept thinking it would get better on its own. It didn't. The message came on a Tuesday in early November. Brooke sent it through the family group chat at 2:17 in the afternoon. I was in my workshop when Miriam came and found me. She was holding her phone and she had the expression I've only seen a few times in 43 years of marriage. The one that isn't quite hurt, isn't quite anger, is somewhere in between that doesn't have a clean name. She handed me the phone and didn't say anything. The message was long. I'll summarize it, but the summary doesn't do justice to the particular tone of it. Friendly on the surface, like a project manager sending a brief to a contractor. Brooke and Travis were hosting Christmas this year, which was fine, we knew that. They'd invited her parents and her sister's family from Northern Virginia, plus 2 couples who were apparently Travis's work friends. 18 people total. What Miriam was looking at was a list. 17 items. I counted twice. Roast turkey, at least 18 pounds. Honey-glazed ham. Mashed potatoes made from scratch. Brooke specified not the box kind. Sweet potato casserole with the brown sugar crust. Green bean casserole. Dinner rolls, homemade if possible. Cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce, homemade gravy. 2 pies minimum. 1 pumpkin, one of your choice. A vegetable tray for the kids. Sparkling cider for the kids. Regular apple cider warmed with spices. And at the bottom of the list, almost like a footnote, if you could get here by 9 a.m. to start on the turkey, that would be great. We want to eat by 2. 9 in the morning. For an 18-pound turkey and 16 sides. At the very bottom after the list, Mom, you're such an amazing cook. I know you'll knock it out of the park. The kids are so excited to see you. Also, could you maybe pick up the groceries on your way? It'll be easier than us trying to find parking with the stroller. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down on my workbench. Miriam said, she sent it to the whole group chat. I said, I saw that. There was a pause. Travis didn't say anything about it, she said. He just sent a thumbs up emoji. I looked at her. She looked at me. Here's the thing I need you to understand about what happened next. Miriam did not cry. She's not a crier by nature, or at least not in front of me, not often. What she did was pull a stool over to the workbench and sit down and fold her hands in her lap and look at the wall for a long moment the way she does when she's working something out in her head. Finally, she said, "I used to make Christmas dinner for my mother's whole family. 12 people. My mother, my aunts, my uncle from Baltimore, all the cousins. I started at 6 in the morning and I didn't sit down until 2 in the afternoon and nobody ever sent me a list. They trusted me." She said it quietly, not bitterly, just factually. I said, "You don't have to do this." She said, "I know." But we both knew that I know didn't mean she'd figured out what to do about it yet. I want to tell you something about the days that followed. Nothing dramatic happened. Miriam didn't send back an angry reply. She didn't call Travis. She went about her week. She goes to a watercolor class on Thursdays. She tends a small greenhouse we built off the back of the house a few years ago. She reads more than anyone I know. But I could see her carrying it. The way she'd get quiet at dinner. The way she'd start to say something and stop herself. On Saturday, she brought it up again. We were drinking coffee at the kitchen table, early morning, still dark outside. She said, "I keep trying to figure out if I'm being too sensitive." I said, "You're not," she said. She sent a grocery list. For our own money. For 18 people we didn't invite, I said. "I know," she said, and Travis sent a thumbs up. That last part was the one that sat heaviest, I think. Not Brooke. We'd come to expect a certain thing from Brooke, even if we'd never said it plainly. But Travis, our son, who was raised in this house, who sat at this kitchen table his whole childhood, who watched his mother cook for every holiday, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday, when she just felt like making something good. And his response to his wife, sending his mother a 17-item work order, was a small yellow emoji. I thought about that for 2 more days. On Monday morning, before Miriam was up, I went to the kitchen and I opened my laptop and I booked 2 rooms. The first was at a bed and breakfast in Savannah, Georgia, a place called the Magnolia Hill Inn that I'd read about in a magazine Miriam had left on the coffee table, dog-eared to that page, months ago. 3 nights, December 23rd through the 26th. Breakfast included. They had a garden she could walk through. The second was a dinner reservation, December 25th, at a restaurant called Harrington's, that a friend of mine had mentioned. Old building, good food, the kind of quiet that costs something. Then I went back to the bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I waited until Miriam stirred. She opened her eyes and looked at me. I think she could tell from my face that I'd done something. I told her what I'd booked. I read her the description of the inn. I told her about the garden. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What about the kids?" And I said, "The kids will have Christmas with their parents, like they should." She sat up slowly. She looked at the wall. She said, "Travis is going to be upset." I said, "I know." She said, "We've never missed Christmas with them." I said, "I know." But Miriam, when did we start owing 17 dishes to earn a spot at the table? That was the question. I hadn't planned it. It just came out. And it sat there between us in the early morning quiet like something that had needed to be said for a long time. She didn't answer right away. She looked at her hands. Outside the window, the sky was just starting to get light. That gray-blue December light that makes everything feel still. Then she said, "Okay." Just that, okay. We didn't call Travis. We didn't message Brooke. I know some people reading this will think we should have confronted them, should have had the conversation directly, should have laid it all out. Maybe. I've thought about that. But here's what I know. We had been laying small things out for 6 years. Gentle corrections, quiet redirections, little moments where one of us said something, and the other person smiled and changed nothing. A direct conversation would have turned into a negotiation, and in that negotiation, Miriam's feelings would have been the thing that got managed. We decided to let our absence be the conversation. 2 weeks before Christmas, I wrote a note, not a text, not an email. A note on paper, the way I grew up doing things. I kept it short. It said, "Travis and Brooke, your mother and I have made other plans for Christmas this year. We wish you and the kids a wonderful holiday. We'll see you in the new year and bring the kids their gifts then. We love you all." I didn't mention the list. I didn't explain ourselves. An explanation would have invited an argument, and I didn't want to argue. I wanted them to sit with the silence and figure out what it meant. I mailed it on a Tuesday so it would arrive by Friday. By Saturday, my phone was ringing. Travis called at 10 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 10:18. The voicemail he left was calm, measured, the voice of someone trying to sound reasonable. He said they were confused. He said they'd been counting on us. He said the kids were asking about Grandma's pies. I called him back that afternoon. The conversation was not easy. I want to be honest about that. He asked what was going on. I told him, calmly, that we'd decided to take some time for ourselves this Christmas. He said they'd been planning around our being there. I said I understood that, and I was sorry for the short notice, but that we hadn't been consulted about the planning before it was presented to us as a done thing. There was a pause. He said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means the message your wife sent to the group chat." Another pause. Longer. He said, "Mom didn't say she had a problem with it." And there it was. That sentence. Mom didn't say she had a problem with it. As if the absence of a protest was the same thing as consent. As if it was Miriam's job to explain why she shouldn't be treated like a catering service. Said, "Son, I need you to think about what it means that she felt like she couldn't say so." He didn't have an answer for that. I told him we'd talk more in January, that we loved him, that we hoped they had a wonderful Christmas. Then I said goodbye and hung up. Miriam was in the greenhouse when I finished the call. I went and stood in the doorway and watched her tend to something. I don't know plants the way she does. I couldn't tell you what it was. She looked up when she heard me. "How did it go?" she asked. "He heard me," I said. "I don't know yet if he listened." She nodded and went back to her plants. Brooke called 2 days later. Miriam answered, because Miriam is braver than me in certain ways. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to one side of the conversation. Brooke's voice was audible through the phone. Not the words, but the pitch of it, rising. Miriam said, "I understand." Said, "I know this is a change of plans." Said, "Brooke, I need you to hear me say this kindly. I am happy to help when I'm asked, not when I'm assigned." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Brooke said something I couldn't hear, and Miriam said, "That's not what I said. I said assigned. There's a difference." After she hung up, Miriam stood at the counter for a moment with her hand on the phone. Then she turned around and said, she cried. I said, "I know." She said, "I almost apologized." I said, "But you didn't." She shook her head. She almost smiled. We drove to Savannah on the 23rd. 11 hours, which is too long for two people in their 70s. So we stopped for the night in Fayetteville and finished the drive the next morning. Miriam brought a book. She fell asleep somewhere in South Carolina with her head against the window, and I drove through the low country with the radio on quiet and thought about how many years it had been since we'd done something like this. Just us, no agenda, no 17-item list. The Magnolia Hill Inn was everything the magazine said it was. The woman who ran it, a woman named Adele, made us coffee when we arrived and showed Miriam the garden herself. I watched Miriam walk through it in her good coat, with her hands behind her back, stopping to look at things, and something in her face was different than it had been for weeks. Lighter, like she'd set something down. Christmas morning we slept until 8 o'clock, which we never do. Miriam ordered eggs Benedict from the breakfast menu and ate every bite. We called the grandchildren on video and they showed us their presents, and the 4-year-old had a new stuffed animal he was extremely serious about, and we laughed. Travis was in the background. He waved at us. He looked tired. After we hung up, Miriam said, "He looks like he cooked Christmas dinner." I said, "Probably did." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Good." We had our reservation at Harrington's that evening. The food was good. The room was quiet. The candles on the table were those thick white ones that drip wax in a satisfying way. Miriam ordered the duck. She said it was the best thing she'd eaten in years, which I think was partly true and partly about something else. Halfway through dinner, her phone lit up. Brooke's name on the screen. She looked at it. I looked at her. She turned the phone face down on the table. We finished our meal. We walked back to the inn through the squares of Savannah, in the December dark, the Spanish moss moving slightly above us. The old houses lit up for Christmas. Miriam took my arm. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. On the drive home, 3 days later, she listened to a podcast about container gardening, and I drove. And somewhere in Virginia, she said, without preamble, "I don't think anything will change." I said, "With Travis?" She said, "With any of it. I think they'll be a little careful for a while, and then it'll go back." I said, "Maybe." She said, "But this Christmas was ours. Whatever happens after, this was ours." I've thought about what she said. She's right, and I think she's right about the other thing too. Some things don't change in a single gesture. The gesture isn't really about changing them. It's about reminding yourself of what you're worth. We went back in January, brought the grandkids their gifts. The 4-year-old climbed onto Miriam's lap and showed her the stuffed animal. whose name turned out to be Biscuit. Travis hugged us both at the door, longer than usual. Brooke made coffee and said, "Thank you," when Miriam said she liked the house. Nobody talked about Christmas directly, but at some point during the afternoon, Miriam was playing on the floor with the kids, and I was in the kitchen helping Travis wash dishes, and he said, without looking at me, I should have said something about the list when she sent it. I kept washing. I said, "Yeah." He said, "I didn't think Mom would mind." I said, "I know you didn't." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That was the problem, wasn't it?" I said, "That was the problem." We didn't say anything else about it. But I think he heard it. I think he finally heard the thing I'd been trying not to say for 6 years. That the problem was never Brooke alone. The problem was that our son had taught his wife, without meaning to, that Miriam was someone who would always absorb whatever came her way without complaint. And that was something Travis had to own. You can't unhear a thing like that. You can only decide what to do with it. That night on the drive home, Miriam fell asleep again before we hit the highway. I drove through the dark with the heater on and the radio low, and I thought about 43 years. About a woman who learned to cook to feed her little brothers and sisters. About the dog-eared page in a magazine. About a garden in Savannah in December. About Biscuit. I smiled a little, kept driving. She woke up somewhere around Culpeper and looked out the window at the dark fields and said, "Are we close?" I said, "About 40 minutes." She settled back in her seat. A moment later she said, "I'd like to go back to Savannah someday. Not for any reason. Just to go." I said, "We'll go," and I meant it.